What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Oh the Horror Podcast with Kayla and Jen. Unfortunately, this week, Kayla has a lot going on, so you guys are stuck with just me. And hopefully we'll survive this and get through this together. But this week, we're going to be talking about something that if you've ever been in one of my lives, you know that I am firmly against and will never have in my house or play with, and that is called the Ouija board. I have a lot of information written down, and there's no way on earth that I can remember all of this. So I'm going to read you my notes. So that way I can make sure I give you all the factual information. I don't want to mess this up because it's a lot of information. So yeah, hang tight. We're going to get right into it. The story of the Ouija board does not begin with the board itself. It begins with grief. During the 19th century, a religious and cultural movement known as Spiritualism spread throughout the United States and Europe. Spiritualists believed that the dead could communicate with the living and that certain people, known as mediums, could help make that communication possible. One of the major moments associated with the movement happened in Hydesville, New York in 1848. Two young sisters, Maggie and Kate Fox, claimed they were hearing mysterious knocking sounds inside their home. They said they could communicate with the source of those knocks by asking questions and receiving answers through a series of raps. Their story spread quickly. The Fox sisters became famous, public seances became increasingly popular, and the idea that ordinary people might be able to communicate with the dead entered mainstream culture. Years later, Maggie Fox publicly claimed that the original knocking sounds had been faked. She later attempted to take that confession back, so even the Fox's sisters' own story became messy and disputed. But whether the sounds were real, faked, or somewhere in between, the movement they helped popularize had already become much bigger than they were. And it's important to understand why. Death was a much more visible part of everyday life than it is for many of us now. Families endured disease, high childhood mortality, and limited medical treatment. Then the Civil War happened and killed hundreds of thousands of people, often far away from their families. Many people never had the opportunity to see their loved ones again, recover a body, or properly say goodbye. So when someone claimed they could deliver one final message from the dead, people wanted to believe them. Seances offered comfort. They offered answers. And for some people, they offered the possibility that death was not really the end. But communicating through knocks was slow. One knock for yes, two for no. Different numbers for different letters. It could take forever. And apparently, even the dead was like, we need something faster than this. So mediums began experimenting with different forms of automatic writing. Some used pencils attached to small devices. Others used tables that tilted, turned, or tapped out messages. A small writing instrument known as a planchette also became popular. The word is French for little plank or little board. Early planchettes sometimes held a pencil and supposedly allowed a spirit to guide the user's hand across a sheet of paper. Eventually, the pencil was removed, letters and numbers were placed directly on a board, and the device became a pointer. In 1886, newspapers were reporting that spiritualists in Ohio were using what we would recognize as a talking board. Letters, numbers, and a movable pointer that allowed spirits to spell complete messages. So no single person woke up one morning and invented the entire idea. Different forms of spirit communication had been developing for years. What happened next was that a group of businessmen saw the idea and thought, we should sell that. Because nothing says mysterious communication with the dead quite like capitalism. In 1890, businessman Charles Kennard formed the Kennard Novelty Company in Baltimore, Maryland, with several investors. Among those involved were attorney Elijah Bond and a man named William Fuld, who would eventually become the person most closely associated with the Ouija board. The company began commercially producing its version of the talking board. It looks surprisingly similar to the one sold today, letters arranged across the board, numbers, yes, no, and a movable planchette. But they still needed a name. According to the story passed down through Ouija history, Elijah Bond and his sister-in-law Helen Peters sat down with the board and asked it what it wanted to be called. Helen Peters was said to be a medium, and she played an important role in helping the company secure the board's patent. When they asked for a name, the planchette allegedly moved across the board and spelled Ouija. Ouija. When they asked what the word meant, the board supposedly answered, good luck, which, let's be honest, that's already suspicious as crap. If a mysterious spirit board names itself and then says good luck, that feels like a less friendly greeting and more like a warning. There is also another possible clue behind the name. Helen Peters was reportedly wearing a locket containing a picture of a woman, and the word Ouija may have appeared above or near the image. Some researchers believe the image may have been of the writer and activist Ouida, whose name is spelled Ouida. So it is possible that the name did not arrive from the spirit world at all. It may have come from a misunderstood word on Helen's jewelry. There is also a popular explanation that Ouija combines the French word for yes, oui, and the German word for yes, ja. Sounds believable. It also appears to be a later explanation, not the story originally told by the people involved. So the honest answer is that we do not know exactly where the name came from, but the version in which the board named itself was definitely better marketing. And then came the patent. In 1891, Elijah Bond was granted United States patent number 446054 for the talking board. There is a famous story about how Helen Peters and Elijah Bond convinced the patent office that the board worked. According to the account, the chief patent officer asked the board to spell his name, something Bond and Peters supposedly did not know. The planchette reportedly spelled the name correctly, and the patent was granted. Did that actually happen? Who knows? We cannot confirm every dramatic detail. The patent itself is real, but the mysterious demonstration comes to us as part of the board's history and legend. You go to work expecting to inspect a new type of farming equipment or a slightly improved door hinge, and two people arrive with a board that claims it can talk to the dead. And then it spells your name. I would have granted the patent too. I would have signed whatever paperwork they wanted and sent them on their way. Let's be so for real. It's spelling my name and you don't know my name? Yeah, I'm going to give you what you want. And then you going and we ain't going to see each other again. Ever. The early Ouija board was marketed as mysterious entertainment, something capable of answering questions about the past, present, and future. One newspaper advertisement described it as a link between the known and the unknown. It cost around $1.50 at the time, which would be considerably more in today's money, but it was still accessible enough to become popular entertainment. It was eerie, but it was also playful. People asked about marriage, romance, money, and the future. Couples used it while sitting closely together with their fingers touching the planchette. In 1920, Norman Rockwell even created a Saturday Evening Post cover showing a young couple using a Ouija board together. Today, if a movie shows two teenagers using a Ouija board, you know somebody is about to crawl across the ceiling. Back then, it could be presented as date night. After disagreements and changes inside the original company, William Fuld took control of the Ouija business and became extremely successful selling the boards. Fuld even allowed the public to believe that he had invented the Ouija board, although the actual story involved multiple people, competing claims, and earlier talking board designs. He was also a fascinating contradiction. Publicly, he promoted the mystery of the board. He credited it with giving him useful business advice. He understood that the supernatural story helped sell the product. But when asked if he personally believed in it, he reportedly said that he did not and identified himself as Presbyterian rather than a spiritualist. So the man most famous for manufacturing a board used to contact spirits apparently did not believe it contacted spirits. That's a great business model, by the way. I don't believe this works, but you should buy one to find out. In 1927, William Fuld died after falling from the roof of a factory that had been built to manufacture Ouija boards. Well, if that ain't a sign, I don't know what is. Some versions of the story claim the board told him to build that factory. That detail has helped turn his death into part of Ouija folklore. However, be careful with the dramatic version circulating online. His death was a tragic industrial accident, and later retellings often made it sound much more supernatural than the documented. Words are hard. This is so much easier when I have Kayla here to talk to and look at. I'm just going to throw that out there. So I'm sorry if it's weird that I'm reading, but here we are. His death was a tragic industrial accident, and later retellings have often made it sound much more supernatural than the documented facts support. The Fold family continued manufacturing Ouija boards until 1966 when they sold the rights to Parker Brothers. Hasbro later acquired Parker Brothers, which is why Ouija is still associated with a major toy company today. And here is one of the weirdest parts of the board's history. For decades, it existed in two completely different worlds. To some people, it was a toy. To others, it was a genuine spiritual instrument. And to many religious groups, it was something much more dangerous. But the moment that truly transformed the Ouija board's reputation did not happen during a seance. It happened in a movie theater. Already, I'm going to tell you, just from the history of it, do I believe that a Ouija board can talk to the dead? The board itself, no, I don't believe that. But there is more. There is a much larger explanation there, and I'm gonna talk more on it. But just right off the bat, from the history of it, do I believe that the Ouija board can talk to spirits or ghosts? No, I do not. Let's move on. In 1971, William Peter Blatty published the novel The Exorcist. The film adaptation followed in 1973. In the story, a young girl named Reagan uses a Ouija board and communicates with someone she calls Captain Howdy. Captain Howdy is not what he initially appears to be, and Reagan eventually becomes possessed by a demonic entity. And there's your bad juju. That's the bad juju we don't want. The movie became a cultural phenomenon. Audiences reportedly fainted, vomited, fled theaters, and became terrified by what they were seeing. Whether every dramatic audience story was accurate or inflated by publicity, The Exorcist undeniably had an enormous cultural impact. Have I seen The Exorcist? Yes. Do I regret watching The Exorcist? It gave me nightmares for many years. So possibly. But am I glad I watched it? I think every movie deserves at least one watch or try to watch. You know what I mean? Not my cup of tea, though. And the Ouija board was suddenly no longer just a quirky way to ask who you were going to marry. It was an entry point, a doorway, a way for something evil to pretend to be harmless long enough for you to invite it inside. The movie did not invent religious objections to divination or attempts to contact spirits. Those concerns existed long before 1973. But The Exorcist gave those fears an unforgettable image. A child. A board sold as a game. An apparently innocent imaginary friend. After that, popular culture repeatedly used the Ouija board as shorthand for something terrible has just been invited into our house. Movies including Witchboard, Ouija, and Ouija Origin of Evil strengthen that connection. Television shows, books, urban legends, paranormal investigators, and eventually internet horror stories continued adding new warnings and new rules. The Ouija board became scary partly because people believed it was dangerous, and people believed it was dangerous partly because they had spent decades watching stories in which using it ended horribly. That does not automatically prove nothing supernatural has ever happened, but it does show that our expectations have been heavily shaped before we ever touch the board. If you sit down expecting a harmless game, you may interpret the experience one way. If you sit down believing you are opening a doorway to demonic forces, every sound in the house is going to feel different afterward. The air conditioner turns off? Entity. The dog stares into the hallway? Entity. A spoon falls in the kitchen? Pack your bags. We is getting the flock out of Dodge. That spoon belongs to the demon now. I'm just letting it know. Demon can have it. Ain't for me. Your brain is going to start looking for evidence that the warning was true. And brains are very, very good at finding patterns, especially when we are frightened. Now, that goes back to what I was just saying, that there is more to my explanation about, do I believe that Ouija boards work? Do Ouija boards talk to the dead? I don't think so. No. But I am a very spiritual person in the fact that I'm a very religious person. Like, this shelf behind me is all Bibles and ancient texts that were not included in the Bible. Like, I've read pretty much everything. And there's a lot that I think can happen whenever you have a specific intent. And by that, I mean, does the board talk to spirits or the dead? I don't think so. But if you take that action to open a line of communication, if you openly want to speak to somebody, somebody is going to speak to you. Now, is it because of the board? No, it's because you chose. You made that decision. You have opened yourself to that communication. And I promise you, it's going to communicate one way or another. There is a lot of evil in this world, stuff that we can see and stuff that we cannot see. And I fully believe that if you take that step to invite something in, something is going to show up. Now, that's just me. That's my hot take on it. It's not the board, it's the intent you have while using the board, if that makes sense. So, does it actually work? Yes and no. It's not the board, it's the intent the person has when they use it. So, can a spirit or a demonic entity really use it? I mean, I believe there's stuff that we can't explain, and I believe that I think things can happen. So, could a spirit use the board? I think so. I don't think the board itself is the reason that it happens. I think it's you opening that communication and then the spirit accepting, and then they do things. Is it real? Is true? I don't know. I've never used a Ouija board, and I ain't never going to use a Ouija board. So that is a question for somebody that has probably used one, and I that ain't for me. That ain't for me. That ain't for me. But if you look it up, there was actually a study done on the Ouija board. Does the Ouija board work? Yes, the planchette can move and it can spell words. It can produce answers that surprise the people touching it. What science disputes is the claim that spirits are responsible for those movements. The leading scientific explanation is something called the ideomotor effect. The ideomotor effect occurs when a thought, expectation, or suggestion produces a small physical movement without the person consciously deciding to make that movement. You really are moving. You just don't experience yourself as intentionally doing it. This can also help explain pendulum movements, table tipping, some forms of dowsing, and other situations where a person is touching an object that appears to move independently. Think about holding a pendulum and trying very hard to keep your hand perfectly still. If someone tells you the pendulum is going to move in a circle, you may begin imagining that circle. Tiny muscular movements can follow the thought without you consciously directing them. Then you see the object moving, which strengthens that expectation, which can produce even more movement. With a Ouija board, the effect becomes even more convincing because multiple people are touching the planchette. Each person feels movement coming from somewhere outside themselves. One person makes a tiny unconscious movement, the other person responds to it. Both begin predicting where the planchette is going, their movements combined. And because no single person feels fully responsible, everyone can sincerely believe, I am not moving it. They may be telling the truth. At least they are telling the truth about what the experience feels like. Researchers have studied this sense of agency, the feeling that you are the person causing an action. In one field study, participants used Ouija boards while wearing eye-tracking equipment. The researchers found that meaningful responses could emerge through the combined expectations and predictions of the people using the board. The answer was not necessarily being consciously created by one secret cheater. It could emerge from two people unconsciously guiding and interpreting the movement together. And here's where things get even stranger. A University of British Columbia study used a Ouija-style setup to explore whether unconscious movement could reveal information stored in a person's mind. Participants answered yes or no questions normally, Participants answered yes or no questions normally and also through ideomotor responses. When participants believed they were only guessing, their spoken answers were correct about half of the time, and what you would expect. When participants believed they were only guessing, their spoken answers were correct about half the time, what you would expect from chance. But the Ouija responses were correct approximately 65% of the time. That does not mean spirits gave them the answers. The researchers suggested that participants may have possessed information in their implicit memory, knowledge stored somewhere in the brain that was not available to conscious recall. So, in a very limited and very specific scientific case, the board might help reveal something unknown. Not unknown to the universe, unknown to your conscious mind. And honestly, that's creepy enough. Imagine asking a question and receiving an answer you do not remember knowing. Even if that answer came from your own brain, it would feel as if it came from somewhere else. This is also why I wasn't moving it does not prove a person is lying. The movement can be real. The lack of conscious intention can be real. The experience can feel completely external. Science simply offers an explanation that does not require a ghost to be sitting at the table. So, science's explanation is that we are doing it. We just don't realize we're doing it. But I think it would be kind of cool to, what information do I have in my brain that I don't remember that I have in my brain, I don't know. Still not going to play with it, though. Still ain't for me. So let's move on to something a little more interesting other than just the history and the science behind it. And that's, what are the rules? And there are quite a lot of them. So one is never use it alone, which my number one rule is never use it at all. But if you're going to, never use it alone. Never use one in a graveyard. Never ask when you are going to die. Never allow the planchette to move through the alphabet backwards. Hold on. That's an interesting one. I wonder why that is. I'm going down another rabbit hole. Never let it count down from 9 to 0. Never allow it to move in a figure 8. Never leave the planchette on the board when you are finished. And most importantly, always say goodbye. The problem is that these rules do not come from one ancient instruction manual. Ouija boards were commercially manufactured in the late 19th century, and many of the rules, now treated as sacred warnings, developed through folklore, religious beliefs, paranormal books, movies, personal stories, and internet culture. Different sources give different rules. Some people insist the planchette must be stored separately from the board. Others claim separating them is dangerous. Some say you should never burn a Ouija board because it will scream. Well, that's terrifying. Others say burning it is the only way to destroy it. I'm going to say fire cleanses and sanitizes. I'm going to burn it. Mm-hmm. The inconsistencies are important because they reveal how folklore evolves. One person tells a frightening story, someone adds a warning. Another person repeats it as a rule. Eventually, people stop asking where the rule came from and begin treating it as established fact. The rule about saying goodbye is probably the most famous. Believers describe a Ouija session as opening a line of communication. Moving the planchette to goodbye supposedly ends the session and closes that connection. If you stop suddenly, remove your hands, or allow the planchette to fly off the board, the doorway may remain open. There is no scientific evidence that failing to say goodbye opens a supernatural portal. But psychologically, a closing ritual can matter. Without that closure, someone who is already frightened may continue feeling exposed, vulnerable, or watched. So even if nothing supernatural has happened, the ritual can affect how safe a person feels afterward. And if you are someone who sincerely believes these boards are dangerous, this is my advice for that. Okay? Don't do it. Just nip it in the bud. It's not a fun idea. It's not a great idea. I understand it could be interesting, and, curiosity did kill the cat. But there are some things you got to weigh risk versus reward. And the risk that something could potentially happen is just too much, because the things that could happen are terrifying. So I'm just going to go ahead and say no. Don't do it. Don't do it. There is supposedly an entity that has something to do with the Ouija board, and his name is Zozo, Z-O-Z-O, and I do have a section written about that. So, there's been several stories where users claim that the board repeatedly began spelling the name Zozo, Z-O-Z-O. Sometimes the planchette allegedly moves rapidly between the letters Z and O. Other accounts claim Zozo identifies itself as a demon, threatens the participants, predicts death, causes scratches, manipulates people, or remains present after the session ends. Some stories connect the name with Pazuzu, the ancient Mesopotamian demon made famous by The Exorcist. But this is where we need to be extremely careful. The modern Zozo legend spread widely through internet forums, paranormal websites, books, videos, and retellings. Once people know the name, it becomes a part of their expectations. If you use a Ouija board after watching 10 videos about Zozo, the letters Z and O are already sitting in your mind. Through the ideomotor effect, that expectation could influence the movement without you consciously deciding to spell anything. Then the board spells Zozo, and you panic, as you should. The reaction reinforces the belief, and your story becomes one more example that teaches the next group what they should expect. That does not prove every Zozo account is fabricated. It shows how folklore can reproduce itself through suggestion. The legend teaches people what the monster's name is, then the monster begins appearing in their sessions. It is a perfect feedback loop. The more people fear Zozo, the more likely they may be to produce or interpret something as Zozo. And the more stories they share, the more powerful the legend becomes. Whether Zozo is an entity, a psychological effect, an internet-created tulpa-like figure, or simply a piece of contagious folklore, the name has become part of the Ouija board experience. And sometimes an idea does not need a physical body to frighten people. It only needs to stay in their mind. So, In conclusion, are Ouija boards dangerous? Yes, I believe they are. Because you can open a line of communication without one. Like I said, I don't think it's the board, it's the intent. And when you intend to open up yourself spiritually to something that is negative, I think that is enough, and something will answer. So actually having a board and showing, hey, I want this communication, you are absolutely inviting something in. And I think that is very bad juju, because you never know what you're going to get. You know, like Forrest Gump said, life is like a box of chocolate. You never know what you're going to get. So is it dangerous? In my eyes, absolutely yes. Should you use one? No. You know, that's really about it. That's my thoughts on the Ouija board. Don't do it. It's bad juju. It's real bad juju. So there you go. That's the history of the Ouija board, how it came about. I thought it was pretty interesting. I'm not going to lie. All this information that I looked up, very interesting stuff. And I think it sheds a lot of light on, you know, is it dangerous? And I really think it just depends on what you believe. If you believe it's dangerous, then it is. And if you are not spiritual in any way and you don't believe that anything bad can happen, I'm not going to say that it still can't happen, but I don't know. I think that's up for everyone to decide on their own. So, with that being said, thank y'all so much for hanging out through this week's podcast episode. Hopefully it wasn't too boring without Kayla. I know that for me, I much prefer Kayla being here. I like talking to her, bouncing ideas off of her. I feel like the conversation flows better instead of me reading off my notes. But what can you do? You know, she'll be back next week, and we'll be back to your regularly scheduled entertainment on Fridays. Every Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern. Also, if you want to catch us live during the week, I go live Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. Central till about noon 30. Kayla goes live in the evenings, about 5:30 Eastern. So head on over to our Tiki Talks and you can see our schedules there. You can follow us there. And I'll link our usernames down in the description below. So hope you have a great week, and we will see you next week for the next episode of Oh, the Horror Podcast.